This is what happens if you never check your rear diff oil. I gotta say, I'm kind of embarrassed. I've owned this 2003 Chevrolet Suburban for over a year now, and I still haven't checked or changed the rear diff oil. But I do have a decent reason. I bought this thing from the original owner. It was always garaged, well taken care of, and only had about 65,000 original miles on it at the time. However, I still consider that very irresponsible of me. Changing that rear diff oil is very easy, and it doesn't cost much. But it's probably the last thing anyone ever thinks about servicing on their vehicle. Now, why should you think about doing this? Well, let's say your vehicle is a 4x4 and it's been off-road and perhaps through water. These differentials have a breather tube, and if that breather tube was by chance submerged underwater, it can actually suck water into the differential. That means that you're driving around with diff fluid that's mixed with water. Not good. Or let's say it has been serviced in the past, but you don't know who did it, you don't know what kind of fluid they used, and you don't know if it was filled up to the proper level. I could go on, but suffice it to say, you do not know exactly what's going on behind that diff cover unless you service it yourself. Now that I've owned this vehicle for over a year, it's time to have it serviced, and that's what I'm gonna do today. I'll be using this Lucas 75 W90 fully synthetic diff lube and a Felpro gasket. Let's get started. All right, guys, the first and most important thing you need to do when servicing your rear diff is to make sure you can loosen that fill plug. Sometimes those fill plugs get seized in there, and if you remove your rear diff cover and you can't get the fill plug out, how are you going to fill it back up? So step one, make sure you can loosen your fill plug. Now, after that, the next thing I did was to remove my 10 rear diff bolts. And I could see there was black RTV squeezed out around the entire cover, so I knew this thing would be somewhat difficult to get off. And once all the diff bolts were removed, except for that topmost one, which I left loose in there, I grabbed my mallet and a flat pry bar and began to carefully wedge it in there. Eventually, I was able to crack that seal, and I made sure to have a drain pan underneath because that's exactly when this thing is gonna start dripping. Then I just pulled it open all the way and let it drain completely. Now, one thing I noticed here is the amount of diff oil that came out didn't seem correct. To refill this thing, I used about 2.5 jugs of this stuff, but I don't think that's what I got out of it. Now, I'm not sure if this has ever been serviced in the past, but it definitely brings home the point that we need to service all the fluids on our vehicles on a regular basis, and especially if this is a used vehicle that you just purchased. Now that I've drained all the fluid, I can work on cleaning the inside of the rear diff cover. There is a magnet in mine, and you can see just how full this thing is. Full of metal shavings. I'll need to clean this thing off the best I can so it can continue to do its job catching metal debris. For the diff cover, I'll just use some thick paper towels and wipe it out to get it clean. The last thing I need to do before I replace that diff cover is to scrape off all the old gasket material. I used a wire brush on mine, but the best tool is probably a Scotch-Brite pad. You just want to avoid making any sort of deep scratches that could cause a leak. I'll need to do this on the diff side too, but in that case, I'm going to shove a clean rag inside to cover the gears, and that will keep anything from falling inside. Then I'm extremely careful to remove that rag so nothing falls off of that rag inside. Okay, with the new gasket placed and the diff cover bolted back on, I can now remove the fill plug we loosened earlier and begin the refill process. Also, I was careful when removing that fill plug not to knock any debris in from there. Refilling the diff is a tedious process, but the use of a piece of tubing from your fill bottle to the fill hole makes the job a little easier. And like I said before, in all, I used about 2.5 jugs of this stuff, just until it starts trickling back out that fill hole. All right, the job is done. A very simple process. Loosen the fill plug, drain and remove the rear diff cover, clean the cover and gasket surfaces, replace cover, and refill. Now I can be sure that the rear diff is filled enough and with the proper fluid. And it only took me about an hour to do. Well, I'm Jimmy, and this is One Road. And if you'd be so kind as to hit that thumbs up, I'd be grateful. And also, subscribe if you're not already. And don't forget to check the description below for more information and links. You can also check my website at www.oneroadgarage.com. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.